This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 277 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with horticulturist Frank Hyman all about tomato growing tips. The plant profile is on Hepatica, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the surprise potato from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Frank Hyman. He is a plantsman and garden book author. Welcome, Frank.
Glad to be here, Kathy. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Great to have you on. And your new book is Ripe Tomato Revolution. We're going to talk about all those revolutionary tomato ideas on this episode. Yeah. Before we get into all of that, Frank, we like to ask our guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
No, I was not. My parents didn't garden. I didn't know anybody who gardened. I didn't start gardening until I was 22 years old. And let me put that in context that I spent my 20s as a very, very successful college dropout. Meaning I decided that before getting a degree, a person should find their callings in life. So I bailed out of school. I was doing well in school, but I bailed out so that I could go on a search for my callings. And nobody was talking about that. That was 1979. So I figured I would just try anything interesting. I would try it. And visiting a friend of mine, he was starting a organic tomato garden and had some booklet from Alan Chadwick. And I was inspired by what my friend was doing and Alan Chadwick's book, and went home and threw up a vegetable garden, shoveling the soil out of the pathways to make raised beds. And so I had 7 raised beds that were 2 feet wide by 6 feet long. So it looked like a cemetery in my yard. But that got me started, and it was, all wonderful from there on.
And how did those first tomatoes do for you?
Oh, they did really well. So I grew up in the subtropics of South Carolina. So it's good, warm, steady summers, and they did real well. I also grew, potatoes, and I forget what else. I remember having a dream about the potatoes that I went to harvest them. So I'm digging up, pulling all these potatoes into my lap, digging them out of the ground, and they're all like the size of marbles. And I felt like I had failed because the old folks said that, if your potato plant has lots of leaves, it's big and bushy, that means you'll have very small potatoes, which kind of only makes sense if somebody overdosed their plants on tons of nitrogen. That could do that. But so that was my anxiety. And I woke up in the middle of the night with that dream that I had all these hundreds of marble-sized potatoes, and I was a failure at gardening. Which, of course, and then when I dug them up, they were like perfect sized potatoes, the size of your fist. And so I had to learn and unlearn a lot of things. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's part of gardening is learning things. And then part of it is the unlearning of things that people just repeat out of habit that turn out not to really be true.
Very much so.
So that's how I got my start.
And so you went from there to get a degree in horticulture at NCSU, and one of the most amazing plantsmen that ever lived, J.C. Ralston.
Oh my God. Yeah, Kathy. And at the time, me and my colleagues, so I went back to school when I was 27 after I had run an organic tomato farm for a food co-op. And before that, I had worked for conventional tomato farmers who were at the beginning of using drip irrigation and black plastic mulch, things like that. So I was kind of on fortunately kind of on the cutting edge of tomato growing, and kind of realized, this is something I want to do with my life, is work with plants and be outdoors. And went back to school at NC State, as you said, and to get a double major in horticulture and design, and studied under J.C. Ralston. He encouraged me with my writing. He was always had time to answer questions, and all of my colleagues at the time, I think we just thought he's a nice professor. Mm-hmm. We did not know he was one of the top, ranked by Horticulture magazine as one of the top horticulturalists of the whole planet of all time. Going back to, folks in ancient Egypt and ancient China. So we just didn't realize it then. And then I've talked to my colleagues as we got out into the world and made our way and started our businesses. We all realized, oh my God, he gave us a vision of life as a plant. It's like we are inside the plant looking out at the world to assess what's needed or what's a good site for plant X, Y, or Z. And so his education under J.C. Ralston was really transformational. This is what you want. This is what I tell young people. This is what you want. The professor you want in college is the one that breaks your brain open so that your ideas about how the world worked before that professor are dismantled. Mm-hmm. And with your professor's help, you reconstruct a new, better, more accurate understanding of how the world works. And so that's the role JC played for me. And I owe a lot to him. Yeah. And plus he was just a delightful man. Oh my God. He was so kind and listening and funny. Yeah. He was a mensch.
I'm so envious of you and other J.C. Ralston disciples, as I call them.
Yes.
That I run into all the time. So you said you grew up in South Carolina, but you are now in North Carolina, correct? In Durham?
Yes. Yeah. I like the South, backward as it can be sometimes. And then I heard about Durham, which was a kind of, in 1984, I moved to Durham, North Carolina. And it was one of the tiny blue dots of North Carolina. And so I fell in right away with a bunch of food co-op people and folks who were starting nonprofits and doing activism and politics. And so I was in my element, just kind of through a series of flukes, actually. But yeah, I love Durham.
And for those listeners who aren't familiar with Durham, North Carolina, can you describe a little bit of the growing conditions there?
Yes. So we're in the center of the state, half-hour drive from the capital of Raleigh and from Chapel Hill. And it's in the Piedmont, so kind of mildly rolling hills. It's not the most charming landscape. It's not compared to the mountains or the beaches, but it's good farming country. It's good gardening country. It was zone 7 when I moved here. I'm told that it's now zone 8, but we can have some pretty strikingly cold winters of like 10 degrees sometimes. So we get 4 full seasons, although I do have to help people understand that here, spring is the season that can't remember its own name. So, right? So, you're not far from me. So I think you have a similar situation where March, April, and some days it's 20 degrees. And other days, like today, it's going to be 87 degrees in March here. And then so it can't remember its own name. It's like, am I winter? Am I summer? Oh yeah, I'm spring. And so for 30 minutes you get 70-degree weather when the season remembers its own name. So yeah, it can jump around a lot this time of year.
Mm-hmm. And so in your Durham garden, aside from tomatoes, Frank, what are you growing?
Whatever my wife wants. I discovered there's a religion, and the name of this religion is Happy Wife, Happy Life. And so whatever she wants, when people ask me my favorite tomato, whatever my wife wants. So what do we got going? And she does a lot of the vegetable gardening too. She has just planted a bunch of greens and peas and potatoes. That's our early spring crops. Mm-hmm. And we still have kale from last fall. We still have kale and broccoli and greens. So, the winter here is mild enough that we've often harvested things like broccoli on New Year's Day. No problem. So, yeah, so it's mostly whatever my wife wants. I'm just sometimes when I'm giving a talk, I introduce myself by saying, by training, I'm a horticulturalist, but by nature, I'm a how-to culturalist. So, especially in the in all the gardens, I'm interested in the plants a lot, but I'm more bent towards how do I have a yard just slap full of plants, but I am not working hard.
Mm-hmm.
So right plant, right place, those kind of things, and being consistent with techniques to keep the workload from piling up on you. So yeah, so I'm a how-to culturalist, and whatever my wife wants, that's what I'm going to plant and grow. That seems to be working. We've been married 21 years. She hasn't kicked me out yet.
And she gets the benefit of all those delicious tomatoes.
Yeah, my wife likes to cook. She worked in some famous restaurant, the award-winning restaurant, when she was young, and so she's thinking about food much more than I do. So she wants it to be a certain way, and I'm the beneficiary of that, of her cooking. So whatever she wants, I'm just going to do it.
I think that's a great life plan, Frank.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, work smarter, not harder. Sounds
Yes.
like your principle.
Yeah.
So, Ripe Tomato Revolution, the subtitle is Planting and Growing Every Type of Tomato, Beefsteaks, Cherries, Plums, Dwarfs, and Heirlooms. So we'll get into all of that. We share a publisher, Cool Springs Press, Corridor Publishing under Hachette, and a publicist, Steve Roth. Shout out to Steve.
Hooray, Steve.
And so we also share the Revolution title. So my book Ground Cover Revolution came out a few years ago, and Ripe Tomato Revolution. So we're interested in how it's a revolution now with tomatoes. But let's talk first about why tomatoes. Like, what is it about tomatoes, Frank?
Well, several things, several interlocking things. First is that if a random person decides they're going to start a vegetable garden, and even if they only plant one thing, one type of plant, it's probably going to be a tomato. I've quizzed hundreds of people over the years about that. Like, oh, if somebody starts a garden and they only plant one thing, what'll it be? Everybody goes, tomato. So this is the thing everybody dreams of. And when I was running the organic tomato farm, we overwhelmingly grew tomatoes because the price on tomatoes was so much higher. There's so much demand, more demand. So we mostly grew tomatoes because the price was so much higher and everything else was just paled by comparison. So for a grower, if you're going to be a market gardener or a small farmer, then getting your skills up on tomato growing is important. And in fact, the final chapter of the book is entirely devoted. It's not really about growing tomatoes per se. It's about if you are a gardener, backyard gardener, and you want to ramp up to be a market gardener, small farmer, these are the things to consider. And one of my favorite parts of that chapter is how to buy a good used pickup truck. So I got a big kick out of writing that chapter, and, to help people who want to ramp up, because where do you go to go from being a good backyard gardener to actually making money? There's not a lot of resources out there, but I suggest a few books that are helpful.
And I think a lot of people might have that retirement ambition or as a second career or a side hustle.
Yes.
And so many of us who've grown tomatoes know that it can be boom or bust. And in those boom years, you don't know what to do with all these tomatoes, right, Frank? You're like,
right.
I'm giving them away. I'm trying to freeze them. I'm trying to preserve them, but I could be selling these.
There you go. That's exactly it. Yeah, because the demand is always there. The interest is always there. The price is always good. And the limiting factor is going to be the skill level of the gardener, of the grower with tomatoes. Because should we get into why people can often have a hard time growing tomatoes?
Yeah, I think let's talk about that, Frank, that, we hear it's your first probably introduction plant, your gateway plant, as you said, to gardening.
Yes.
But it can also be one of the harder vegetables to grow. And maybe that shouldn't be your gateway. Maybe you should start with radishes. But what makes tomato growing a little bit harder than the other vegetables?
Yeah, so plenty of people, if you have grown tomatoes, you've had the experience where you go out to your garden and your tomato plants have a bunch of brown leaves, or the whole thing is wilting and dying. And right next to it is probably a pepper plant that is totally perfect and unharmed, uninjured. And the issue with tomato plants is that the original tomato plant evolved in a drier climate. So they never really developed the kind of immune system to fight off the bacteria and fungus of high rainfall areas. They evolved on the Pacific coast of Chile and Peru in what are called Mediterranean conditions, so small M, Mediterranean. And there's 5 regions on the planet that have Mediterranean weather, and that means they have about 20 inches of rain per year. Where if you're in the eastern US, we've got 40 inches of rain. So twice as much rainfall means you have a wider range of species of bacteria and fungus and just a higher populations of bacteria and fungus. And so the original tomato, it's on the coast of Peru, and it was actually a cherry-sized tomato. It wasn't like a big one and that people are bred off of. It started out as a cherry tomato, and the Aztecs up in Mexico had their trading paths, and they found this Peruvian tomato, and they're like, yeah, we like this. We're taking some home. And they're growing them in central Mexico, which in the winter has Mediterranean, small m, Mediterranean conditions. And that's when does the U.S. get tomatoes from Mexico? In the winter. So they're growing and they're getting some rain, but not too much rain in Mexico where the Aztecs are. The Spanish show up. They're like, yeah, we're taking your tomatoes and your gold and silver. Thank you very much. And they go back to Spain, which is capital M, Mediterranean. So 20 inches of rain. Tomato plants do great. Their cousins in Italy are like, yeah, we want those. And Italy is in the Mediterranean, 20 inches of rain. The plants do great. And then the British on their, the wealthy aristocratic British folks on their tour of the Mediterranean, they discovered tomatoes in Italy. And they're like, yeah, we want to grow these and eat these all the time. And they bring them home to England, which parts of the British Isles have like 60 inches of rain. Right? So they don't do well. And I kind of suspect the notion that tomatoes were poisonous was partly influenced by that. It was kind of a sour grapes thing for the British. Like, they all died. They were probably poisonous anyway. So that's just a theory. I haven't confirmed that with any historians, but I can see where that would be the case. And tomatoes were not popular at all in England until the aristocrats could afford big panes of glass to build greenhouses. And so they could keep the rain off the plants, which is the problem. When the leaves are wet, microbes can take off. When the ground is too wet, root rot can take off. And so that's kind of the thing. So if you're in the US and you are in like Southern California, which is one of the Mediterranean regions, your tomatoes should do well there without much extra effort. But if you're in the rainy Eastern US, if you're in the very rainy Pacific Northwest, you will struggle. Yeah, there will be exceptions, though. Like there are, when you're in a rainy region like the Pacific Northwest, there's going to be areas called rain shadow, which is when the rain clouds have to go up over a high mountain and they dump all their water. And on the far side of the mountain range, that's called a rain shadow because the clouds have dumped most of their moisture. And so on the other side of the mountain range, an east-west south mountain range, it can be drier. So you can have exceptional places in the Pacific Northwest or the British Isles where tomatoes will do well, but that's a very local kind of scenario.
And that's always, as we talked about, right plant, right place, know your microclimates, know your local conditions, what side of the mountain you're on. I would hope you would know that. And so New Jersey, famous for tomatoes, right smack in the middle of the mid-Atlantic. They have similar, I think, rain to the Carolinas and here in the DC area.
But 40 inches.
Is it the soil? And we're going to talk about how to make that great growing soil.
Yes. So there's 2 actions that farmers and gardeners can take to deal with those microbes. One is spraying the heck out of them after each rain or after you've used overhead irrigation. And that's the farmers I first worked with. That's what they would do, is they would just spray copper sulfate and other stuff on their tomatoes to keep the microbes down. And one of my rules of gardening is that spraying is not gardening. It's a drag. And if you can avoid it, you'll be much happier. So a lot of the conventional farmers were spraying to keep the diseases down. A lot of organic farmers were the first ones to start using what are called hoop houses, which is sort of looks like the shape of a Quonset hut, but it's just some PVC pipe making a hoop over the planting, and then you cover those hoops with, so they're like ribs. You cover those ribs with sheets of clear plastic, so sunlight can come through, but the rain can't come through and the sides are open for breezes and pollinators and things. And so the plants can grow as if they were in a greenhouse. So they're not getting rained on. The leaves stay dry. So microbes don't spread and propagate. And the soil, you're using soaker hose or drip line. So you're getting a good amount of moisture to the roots, but you're not flooding the roots where a root rot can get started. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the two options that large growers have. And for this book for home gardeners, I was thinking, a hoop house will work, but it's kind of ugly. And the plastic sheeting has to be replaced every other year because the UV radiation will break it down. So I decided, I'm a designer, I'm a carpenter, I'm a horticulturist. I'm going to invent something that does not look ugly and doesn't have to be replaced every other year. And so I invented a thing I call the tomato house, and it can be built. You don't need carpentry skills. Have diagrams and information in the book for how you can build it just out of 2x2s. So pieces of wood, a little bigger around than your thumb, and 4 posts, 2x2 posts screwed to the outside of your raised bed, and some cross pieces to support what's called polycarbonate sheeting. So it's like you can buy it at a big box store, Lowe's, Home Depot, what have you. And it's a 4x8 sheet, as big as a sheet of plywood, but much lighter because it's just clear plastic, but it's stiff enough and it's clear enough so sunlight comes through, the rain does not come through, and you can easily, one person can pick it up and put it on top of your structure and then pre-drill a few holes, drive some screws in it, and it's going to stay in place. The wind isn't going to blow it apart. And then at the end of the season, if you want, you can take it down and store it out of the weather, which will make it last twice as long because polycarbonate will stand up to UV radiation for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. But if you're only using it for your tomato crop, it's about 6 months, 7 months of use. Then at the end of the season, you can just take your drill and unscrew all the screws, put it out of the weather in the garage or back of the, north side of your house. So it's out of the sun. And then your polycarbonate will last 20 years.
Yeah.
So huge financial, so very inexpensive to build. Very, I have photos from October. So we were picking tomatoes through October. And the ones that I had under a tomato house were green from top to bottom, like no leaf diseases, nothing. And in the next bed where I just had plants without any kind of cover, they're just like half of the foliage is brown from leaf diseases. So keeping the rain off makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I would think that with polycarbonate, when you're saying bringing it in from the winter is a great idea because winter can often crack and split plastic like that. You want to keep it in a indoor place or a shed or a garage can definitely lengthen the life of it. But keeping that black splash, we'll call it, off the soil where the microbes hit the ground and then splash back onto the leaves is a great idea. So I love this idea of the little tomato house.
Yeah, people don't realize that raindrops are strong enough that they can splash soil with bad microbes up onto the lower leaves. And then the next rain will splash those microbes on the lower leaves to the mid-level leaves. And, like a ladder, just goes right on up.
And I think a lot of people, what they do is, of course, mulch around the plants to prevent some of that splashing. That can help take off some of those lower leaves. So then you don't have the splash ladder. In theory.
Splash ladder. I'm going to steal that term, Kathy. Yeah.
So there's another term that's similar, which is, I don't know if you've ever heard, Frank, of the Minnesota palm trees, which are the pines, that you're on when you're going down the highway and they're limbed up.
Yes.
And not because somebody did that, but somebody took out that bottom layer at one point to clear for the road or sidewalk, and then that caused the next layer of branches to collapse and then the next layer to collapse, and then you end up with these Minnesota palm trees, so to speak. So these would almost be like your tomato palm tree.
You kind of have to do the Minnesota palm tree treatment on your tomato plants if they're exposed to the rain. Yes. And the people in Southern California are listening to this going like, what are they talking about? My tomatoes grow fine.
Count your lucky stars if you're
in
a Mediterranean climate.
Yes.
So what about containers? So that's for in-ground growing, but can we make that same little hood or house around our containers too?
I'll be honest, I had not considered that, but the answer is yes. It's just a matter of, getting your drill gun out and your screws and a handsaw and cutting pieces of 2x2 to make a little frame, supports with a roof that's tall enough that your tomato plant's in a container, which I would recommend dwarf tomatoes. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to get as tall. And just whatever you can do to keep the rain off, but let the sun in. That's the trick.
So even if you had maybe another structure, a lean-to, an old greenhouse that was maybe not in the best repair and great use for a greenhouse over the winter, that might be your tomato house.
Yes. If the glass roof is intact or whatever material it is, if it's intact and clear and all the vents are open, the doors are open, so you get the breeze blowing through, then that would work. That would suffice because you'd be solving the two problems. You're blocking the water, the rain, but you're not blocking the sunlight.
So there is hope out there for everybody who's like, well, that's all my to-do list is to repair my greenhouse. Yes. Use it as a tomato growing house. And you could even throw like a clear tarp over even if there was missing window panes on the ceiling or anything like that.
Yes, so that would work.
I'm all about the reuse and repurposing. I think that's a perfect use for that.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's go on to your soil. So preparing the site, ideal soil conditions.
Yeah, so good drainage, because going back to the issue of too much moisture. And so raised beds, which are obviously going to drain more quickly than the surrounding soil. And so that helps keep your roots on the not dry, but less soggy is the goal there with the soil. And so raised beds are great. And more organic matter is better. And I think there's among some gardeners, there's confusion that adding compost or manure is the same as adding organic fertilizer. And I think of them as separate things entirely. Adding organic fertilizer, like a bag you would buy at your garden center, and it doesn't have to be like fertilizer specifically for tomatoes. Any kind of Espoma brand fertilizer, if you have a bag in your shed, go ahead and use that. When I plant a tomato transplant, I dig a hole and then put a couple of fistfuls of any kind of organic fertilizer in the hole and then plant the plant and off they go. So organic fertilizer to plants is similar to vitamins are for us. right? It's like we need vitamin D. We have to have vitamin C to be happy and healthy. And the nutrients in organic fertilizer kind of are similar in that way. The plants have to have a certain amount of phosphorus. They have to have a certain amount of potassium, magnesium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you definitely need organic fertilizer to do that. The compost or manure, bag manure, is more about creating conditions for the positive, beneficial microbes in the soil and for worms. So you're feeding them, and by their population being high, there's going to be more oxygen in the soil. And this is one of the nutrients that all plant roots need, is oxygen, and it doesn't get enough attention, I think. And so that's when you're adding compost or manure, mostly what you're doing, it's less about feeding the plants per se. It's feeding the soil microbes and earthworms, and they create a looser soil. So as the roots are growing, they're like, oxygen, 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 oxygen. I just love this garden bed. And so they are happy. And so the manure compost may have a certain amount of nutrients / vitamins in it, but it rarely has as much as your plants would benefit from. So having compost and organic fertilizer together is going to get you the best results.
Yeah, and I would think that feeding the soil, job number one of the gardener.
Yes.
If you give your tomatoes extra fertilizer, I like to use fish emulsion fertilizer.
Sure, yes.
Just as an all-round one. But that's a bonus, right? Vitamins are a bonus. It's not always necessary.
Well, it helps to get your soil tested, and I think every state in the U.S. has an agricultural extension service. So pretty much every county, or if not your county, then the next county will have an office where you can get a little cardboard box, and get your soil tested, and they can tell you how much nutrients you have in your soil and whether you really need to add anything. If you've been gardening for a long time, you may not need very much at all. But here's one caveat about that, and this isn't anything against the agricultural extension services, but the soil test information does not always make it clear that one of the things they are not able to test for is nitrogen. Because nitrogen can get into a stage where it evaporates. And so it's not easily measured the way phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are easily measured. And they give you your soil test results, and you can take that to the bank. It's going to be accurate, and you can decide whether you need to buy organic fertilizer or not. But the amount of nitrogen in the soil they can measure it for you, but it's like an expensive, like a $35, $45 test. And even then it's not reliable over the course of the season. So, but they will, when you get your soil test, they don't always, sometimes they make that clear, sometimes it's unclear, or sometimes it's in between, but they will give you a number. They'll say, oh, you need to apply this much nitrogen, and which is just some standard off the shelf number. And if you have pretty good soil and you've been adding organic fertilizer and there's a lot of nitrogen already in your soil, sometimes the soil test will lead you to add more nitrogen than your plants need. And I think it's helpful to think of nitrogen as similar to sugar for kids. Like if your kids are getting plenty of sugar, they might look healthy. They're running around, they're very perky, and they're growing, not in the best way. But they're very active, and you think, oh, they're all pumped up. And nitrogen can be like that. Too much nitrogen is like too much sugar for kids. So too much nitrogen for plants, they are very green, this deep, rich green, and they're growing very fast. And that can be reinforcing to a gardener who's not familiar with these issues. And the insects and diseases that are problems for our plant, especially tomatoes, they are looking for that rich green and that fast growth, because what they understand from their evolution is that a plant that looks like that has an immune system. If it has an immune system for that bug or disease, that immune system is being diluted by that rich, lush growth. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
So it's too much of a good thing will lead to a bad thing. And so too much nitrogen makes the plants more appetizing for bugs and diseases. Where if you have like an optimal amount of nitrogen, so things are growing at a steady pace, they're a more natural green color, that they also have a stronger immune system, which is just as people are learning about human health, it's like that's a big deal. You got to pay attention to that. You'd rather do things to get a strong immune system than have to take some harsh pharmaceuticals. And in the garden, if you're not focused on creating a strong immune system, then you're going to have to spray some nasty chemicals, or you're going to watch your plant fail because its natural immune system has been diminished by too much nitrogen. So, yep.
Yeah, too much nitrogen is a common beginner error, as you said. And of course, you see that lush green growth, and it's very rewarding and reinforcing, as you said. I'm not going to name the big fertilizer company that promotes that look, and you can always tell when somebody's used that big fertilizer company product. Again, I'm not going to name any names because they have those very dark green, big growth tomatoes, but not as much productive fruit growth. But then the opposite, Frank, is a plant that's stressed or not doing well also is, of course, vulnerable to diseases and pests and insects. So it's kind of like you have to hit that perfect nitrogen level. And is there any way a home gardener, besides feeling their way in experience, might know how to do that at first?
Yes. The first thing would be to swear off conventional fertilizers, like bags that say 10-10-10. There is no natural material that comes with that even amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which is what those three numbers measure. And you get quicker results using a chemical fertilizer, but I'm advocating that instead of calling it a chemical fertilizer, we call it a salt fertilizer. Because the reason it dissolves so quickly and gets into the plant so quickly is because functionally the chemistry of that kind of fertilizer it's a salt. And salts, what defines salts, so the sodium chloride on our table is not the only salt. It's just the one people are most familiar with. And it's these little crystallized granules. You put it in water, it dissolves quickly. And lots of other salts do the same thing. Chemical fertilizer, which I call salt fertilizer, also dissolves quickly and the plants can absorb it quickly. And if you've ever used that kind of fertilizer, on the bag, it warns you to be really careful not to apply the fertilizer to the roots because it'll burn them.
Yes.
They're not telling you that the burning is salt drawing moisture out of the plant because it functions like salt. So chemical fertilizer, salt fertilizer can be hazardous. And it's the easy way. It's probably the most common way that new gardeners get too much nitrogen into their plants, and then the plants are more attractive to bugs and diseases. And you can avoid that kind of thing pretty much 100% by using organic fertilizer because it's not in the form of salt. It needs the microbes in the beneficial microbes in the soil and the earthworms to kind of help break it down. And so by adding compost to your soil, when you add the organic fertilizer, all those microbes help break down the organic fertilizer into forms that the plants can pull up with their roots. And they don't get burned and they don't overload on nitrogen. So they're not like a kid on sugar racing around the house until they collapse. And so there's lots of benefits of, foregoing chemical fertilizer and going with organic fertilizer.
And when you say adding compost, adding aged manure to your soil, are you top dressing it? Are you working it into the soil?
You can do it both ways. I think part of gardening, part of being a happy gardener is deciding what your temperament is. Are you the person who's happy just to top dress it and cover it with some mulch and call it good, which is me? Or do you want to work it into the ground? You're getting your CrossFit training activity. Mixing it up, which you can do that too. That works great. And so, but it's to me, it's more of if you're gardening a piece of ground for the first time, yes, turn the soil with the compost, mix it all up and make a 4 to 6 inch layer that the earthworms can just feel like they've gone to heaven. But if you've been gardening for a while and you're soil is pretty rich and brown and dark and loose, then you can just top dress, save yourself the labor, top dress. The earthworms that are in the existing soil will just migrate up into the new compost and start breaking it down. And one caveat there is resist the temptation to think of a layer of compost as a layer of mulch, because if it's exposed to the sun, the sunlight will break it down more quickly than you want. Yeah, so if you have some good rich soil, you can add the compost layer or the manure layer on top as a top dressing is the term people use, and then put a layer of inexpensive or free organic mulch on top of that to protect the compost from sunlight and heat breaking it down.
Great tip. What are some of those mulches that you like for specifically for tomato gardens?
If our tomatoes, anything you can get your hands on that's organic will work. In Durham, we have lots of coffee roasters. And one of their waste products that they just have to throw away if gardeners don't take it is called coffee chaff. It's chaff, the same word as when you talk about wheat and chaff, separating the wheat from the chaff. Chaff is a papery coating on grains of wheat. And there's also a papery coating on the berries of coffee. Coffee beans is the more common term. And so when the coffee roaster company that makes your coffee for you, makes your coffee beans or coffee grounds for you, when they get a big bag made of burlap and it's full of green coffee beans and they dump that into their roasting machines, and the heat makes the papery chaff around each bean dry up and blow away. And so they blow it out into a pile where it's out of the way, and then they're just roasting the coffee beans and then they sell them to you. Right. So they got this waste product of coffee chaff that smells like coffee. I love it so much. And I go to the local coffee roaster and they normally have bags of it, like big garbage bags, plastic garbage bags. And you can see through the bag into the coffee chaff. And so I load those up. And any person, even if you don't have great upper body strength, this stuff is so lightweight that any person could pick up a bag with their left hand, pick up a bag with their right hand, and lift it up. And it is so light. And you throw it in the back of your truck or your vehicle, and it's easy to spread because it's so lightweight, and it smells like coffee. And it has this beautiful pale brown color. And you apply that as your mulch, and so you spent no money on mulch. You're using a waste product that often goes to the dump unless the coffee roaster has a deal with some large compost business, or unless they let local gardeners pick it up. And so it looks beautiful, smells great, works really well, breaks down over the course of a season, 6 or 8 months, depending on your temperatures and everything and rainfall. And some people worry that when you get a light rain, the upper surface of the chaff will kind of congeal. And some people worry that the rain doesn't go through, but it only appears that way. It's just you get a light rain, the surface kind of congeals. But if there's a normal rain, it will saturate the coffee chaff and go through it.
Excellent.
The chaff is not going to stop the rainfall. And if you hear somebody saying that it does, you don't have to argue with them. You just think to yourself, well, Frank Hyman says it doesn't, so I'm going to listen to him. Because there's lots, and I'm not knocking other gardeners or writers, but there's a lot of information that sounds true and seems to make sense. And it's the same in every field of work or study, is that there's some things that sound true and nobody's ever tested them. And then they do test it and they go like, oh gosh, that thing we all believe wasn't true at all. So there's a fair amount of that in gardening. And again, that's not criticizing the people who pass these ideas on. I'll give you one example is that everybody who got into growing tomatoes thought it was important to cut off the suckers. Well, you had to cut off the suckers.
Yeah.
And me, I'm like, wow, that's just too much work. And it's, if you had to cut off the suckers to get any fruit, I would have cut off the suckers. But you got fruit anyway. And then it turns out some university said, let's study that one. And they did a control group of tomatoes where nobody cut off the suckers, and another control group where they cut off some of the suckers, another control group where they cut off all the suckers. And it made no real significant difference in the amount of fruit, the weight of the fruit, number of the fruits.
Yeah, Frank.
So it's kind of an oversold idea that,
yes.
That can go away now.
So glad you said that. I am so sick of getting that question, frankly.
Yes.
because
Yes.
they were like, "Do you pinch off your suckers?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?
Right.
That's busy work. Why would I do
Right.
that?" And
Right.
I have seen no difference, and
Yes.
I just feel like it's like a fetish almost, like
Yes.
sitting there and petting
Yes.
your plants. If you want to, sure, go ahead, but I don't see why
Yes.
you would do that. There's many other things you need to do in the garden that
Yes.
can keep you busy. Going back to the coffee chaff, since I'm surrounded by many, many Ethiopian coffee shops, they're very
Ooh.
proud of their coffee. I'm going to be going out into all of them now and asking about the chaff.
Yeah.
But to be
It
clear,
might not be the shops, might not have
yes,
it, unless they are doing the roasting
yes,
in-house.
a lot of them are doing their own roasting and,
Okay,
and
yes,
production.
yes. They will be glad for you to come,
Yeah,
and
but
then you get a cup of coffee while you're there, and it's like it's a
yes.
great afternoon.
And to be clear, it's not the grounds. We're not
Right,
asking for the
correct.
grounds. Occasional coffee grounds, probably okay. Very occasional, right? But not
Yeah.
as a top.
Coffee grounds, I would put them in your compost so they can be breaking down. If you put them straight into your plant beds, the caffeine can be too strong for the root.
Yes, yeah.
So you can really set something back if you're adding coffee grounds, fresh coffee grounds to your soil. Yeah, just throw it in the compost. Just boop, throw it in the compost, and it's good. It's happy. It's really beneficial because it's a high. It's a in composting. There's all this differentiation between things that are green and things that are brown, which is useful. And coffee grounds are brown, but they are more like greens in that they have more nitrogen. So, but the caffeine is the issue. The caffeine will break down during composting, but you dump it in the soil, it doesn't break down. It just damages roots.
Especially, I've seen people use it as a top dressing, say in the fall and over winters. That might be okay, just like wood ash or something, but not on growing plants that we already talked about. Too much nitrogen, not good. So let's talk about trellising and caging, since that is a lot of the challenge for beginning, especially tomato gardeners, is, everybody buys that kind of inverted triangle thing that they sell or inherits them, or somebody gives it to them for free because it failed for them. So they're like, here's my old tomato cages, you can have them. And then you quickly learn that maybe just a stake in the ground, a rebar stake or something else might be better to tie my tomatoes onto.
Yeah, anything is better than those little quote unquote trellises. I think that the companies that produce those, 99% of their market is people who've never grown tomatoes before. They're like, oh, look at this. I'm going to grow tomatoes this year. Let me buy this tomato trellis. And then they use it one time. They're like, oh, this is lame. And I think the best use for those size trellises is like holding up peonies, right? Because once they start flowering, they're flopping all over the place. And you don't want to, and the time it takes to stake up all your peony stems. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I think those are good. If you still have some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I recommend is, I didn't invent this, but it's tomato cage, tomato tower, and they are made from, some people like cage their tomatoes. So like a 4, 5, or 6 foot tall tube made from fence wire, galvanized fence wire. And that's not a bad thing, but the issue is that the openings in that fence wire are not big enough to get like a 1/2 pound or 1 pound tomato out. So you have to cut out openings in the hole. And when they're galvanized, they're this gray color that is not complementary to the garden. So aesthetically, I'm not crazy about them. They're also, the fence wire is more expensive than you think it's going to be, and you have to cut all these holes in them. And what works better is called concrete reinforcing wire. The professionals, the name they use is remesh, REMESH, but I call it concrete reinforcing wire because people generally know what that means. If you've ever watched a crew that was going to pour a sidewalk or a concrete floor, before they pour the concrete, they often lay out what looks like a rusty fence wire, but the openings are 6 inches by 6 inches. So a 1 pound tomato and your hand will go right through that easily. And it's got a coating of rust that keeps the rest of the steel from rusting more. So I've had some of these tomato cages outdoors for like 30 years, and they look the same as when I, cut them to size. And the issue with this, so I think this is the best for indeterminate tomatoes that are going to grow long time, get longer, like a vine, is I think these tomato cages are the best thing because they're the least bother. and they're
Mm-hmm.
easily stored. The challenge with them is you can only get it in a roll that is, the price has been going up. So it's, the roll has enough metal in it to make 25 tomato cages, but it costs $200, right? And it's heavy. I mean, I'm strong. I'm a stonemason. I cannot pick up one of these rolls by myself. I can drag
Yikes.
one or roll one, but so that makes it challenging for the home gardener, for the average home gardener. But if you are a market gardener or a retired person looking to make a little money on the side or whatever, you can have this delivered, have these big rolls delivered, or if you have a pickup truck, they'll help you put them in the truck, and then you just roll them out of the truck onto the ground and roll them into place. And use bolt cutters, long handled bolt cutters. You don't have to bend over too much, and you can cut them to size. And then I sell them. So this is what I do. It's going to be time for me to start working on this, because mid-April is when people plant tomatoes here. And at the end of March, I'm going to buy like 4 rolls, enough to make 100 cages, which I don't need them. I already have all the cages I need. But I put out on all my social media, email things, newsletter things, okay, I'm making the best tomato trellis in the world. And what will I charge for them this year? I don't know, probably like $20 or something a piece. And I make $1,000 clear. I clear $1,000 in a weekend.
Nice.
Right.
Well, nice little side hustle, everybody. Listen out there, because every zip code needs this, like across the country.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is hard to do for the average gardener. But if you're part of a community garden, this would be a perfect project for a community garden. One person has a pickup truck. Somebody probably has bolt cutters, and you just set up a day, and everybody pays so that nobody's losing money. Or if you're a market gardener, people are coming to pick up, their CSA type deal. You could be selling these and it's such, even with the price of metal going up.
Yeah, I can totally see like a Master Gardener group doing this as a fundraiser. So great
There you
idea,
go.
Frank. So no discussion of tomatoes is complete without talking about favorite varieties. And you already said whatever your wife likes. But let's talk about maybe best varieties for the Mid-Atlantic. So for us here in the humid Mid-Atlantic, we already talked about not ideal because we're not Mediterranean conditions.
Yeah.
But what are some of those great tomatoes to grow for us?
Yeah. So if you don't have your tomato house, your hoop house, or your greenhouse set up, and you're just growing out in the wild with your tomatoes, the ones that people have the most success with generally are cherry tomatoes. I've met many people who said, Frank, I've just stopped growing beefsteaks or paste tomatoes. I only grow cherry tomatoes. And the plants seem to do better. And so I can recommend generally cherry tomatoes will do well without that overhead protection. Cherokee purple is well known as one that has fewer leaf diseases. I'm not saying it's disease free, but you're going to get a crop and they're going to do well. Can I think of any others that people have talked about? Those are the only 2 things. Oh, okay, 3 things. So cherry tomatoes are going to do above average. Cherokee purple is going to do above average. There are hybrid tomatoes, and this is an important thing to share, is that a lot of hybrid tomatoes have been bred to be disease resistant. And hybrid tomatoes, when heirlooms became a thing, maybe that was in the 80s or was it 90s? When that became a thing, it was almost like the term hybrid tomato was a dirty word. And the issue is that there are some hybrid tomatoes that farmers grow, and those particular varieties are popular with farmers because they can put them in a truck and they can bounce around in the truck to the grocery store and they aren't all bruised. Yeah. And the trade-off is that the flavor is okay, but it's not great.
And thick skins, yeah.
Yes, but that's certain kinds of hybrids. That doesn't describe all hybrids. When I was running the organic tomato farm for our food co-op, and we were selling to the precursor of Whole Foods and to fancy restaurants, and they loved our tomatoes, I did not tell them we're growing the hybrids I was familiar with from working with some tomato farmers, but these are a better hybrid called Mountain Pride. And the flavor was great. The texture was great. People love them. And they did really well. And I don't remember dealing with leaf diseases at all. And this was in North Carolina, in the Piedmont. Nice. So cherry tomatoes are going to do above average, Cherokee purple above average, and hybrid tomatoes, that are bred to be disease resistant, but are also have a reputation for having good flavor. And there's just oodles and oodles of them. I actually, this weekend, I met the guy, George Ball, who's the chairman of Burpee Seeds.
Yes.
And we had a great talk about hybrids and heirlooms. And so Burpee Seeds would be one to look at to see what kind of hybrids with good flavor they're recommending. If you want to do the heirlooms, yeah, I'm all for heirlooms. Yes. They have particular qualities, but more of them are going to struggle with diseases and bugs. So it's a trade-off. Mm-hmm. So I'm not down on heirlooms, but I'm also not against hybrids. To me, the hybrid heirloom thing is a little bit like the when native plants became an issue. And some of us are like, yeah, I'll add some native plants. But I like my Chinese exotics like tea olive and gardenia. I want fragrant flowers. But some people felt like the only plant to plant was a native. Their garden had to be 100% natives. And it's kind of like, you trade off a lot of things by not being more ecumenical, shall we say. And so being ecumenical about tomatoes is a benefit. Grow some heirlooms for the great flavor when you just want to like take that bite, or you're making a tomato and mayonnaise sandwich, and then grow some hybrids so you'll know that no matter how rainy the season is, you'll have tomatoes to share with friends, and they'll taste good and be good in salads and all those things. Yeah.
And those cherries, because they're prolific and easy.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's like candy. Oh my God. How do they make them that sweet? What are they doing?
Such a fan of especially like sun sugar and citrine, where you just pop them in your mouth. High sugar content.
Yes.
So I hadn't heard of Mountain Pride, so I just looked it up. It is high yielding determinant, meaning bush hybrid tomato, developed by, guess what, NC State University for the mountain regions, hence the name Mountain Pride. So I think that's a great choice. Crack resistant, which I think is more and more, Frank, of interest for local gardeners, especially in Mid-Atlantic, because we get huge rain events, right? And then nothing for 3 weeks, and then another huge rain event.
That's a recipe for splitting tomatoes, which is sad.
And I think a lot of beginner gardeners, blame themselves for that, but that's consistent watering where you can't control the rain. So again, if you're keeping the rain off, you can control that.
Yes.
So let's sum up with maybe some watering techniques. And I'm going to guess you don't take a watering can and dump it from above on the plant. Like you see the cartoons of little kids watering, because that would be doing the same thing that we're trying to keep the rain off the leaves.
Yes. Yeah. The overhead irrigation is super bad for tomatoes because you're creating conditions for bad microbes. Simple as that. Yeah. And hand watering can take so long. Oh my God. I think people underestimate the quantity of water that a given plant needs. And there's like, they've wetted the mulch and they feel like they're on to the next plant. And then things may be struggling. Yeah. So no overhead irrigation. I like to use soaker hoses. Some people use drip lines, which is fine. But soaker hoses I find a little bit easier to use. And and they distribute the water more widely. And so basically my setup is where I have the spigot, I put on a timer, which might just be as simple like a egg timer where you set it manually, or if I'm out of town, I will set up a timer that has a little computer in it. So, a certain amount of water every 2 or 3 days. And from the timer, I've got a garden hose that goes from the timer to the garden itself, because you don't want to spew water all over the place. And then once it reaches the raised beds, then I add a soaker hose and I loop it around individual plants. After I've spread the compost, after I've planted the plants, then the soaker hose gets spread out, and then the mulch goes on top of that. So the mulch keeps the compost from being burned up. It keeps the soil from drying out. It helps the moisture from the soaker hose just go down into the soil. It keeps the rainwater that comes. It keeps that from splashing microbes up onto the splash ladder, as you said. I love that term. That's great. That's exactly it. And it's a splash ladder. And so, but the mulch can diminish that, and your soaker hose is under the mulch. And so the leaves are going to stay as dry as they can be, especially if you have a droughty season. That'll be to your benefit.
Excellent. Let's Thank you for all that great advice, which will hopefully help not just beginner tomato gardeners, but those like myself who've been struggling for years with blight, early blight, all the things. But how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
The best way is I do a newsletter, a Substack newsletter, and it's free. I don't charge anything, but it includes, I will post when I have classes coming up, and I teach on 3 different things. So on organic gardening, which will include tomatoes. I teach about foraging for wild edible mushrooms. My previous book is called How to Forage Mushrooms Without Dying. Some people prefer that option, so I kind of leaned into that. And I also do classes occasionally on keeping backyard chickens, which those ideas are in my first book called Hentopia. If you go to YouTube and search for Hentopia, you'll see my 2-minute book trailer with a surprise ending. And so if you go to Substack and you search for Frank Hyman, FrankHyman, you'll find my newsletter and you can subscribe, and it's no charge. And you'll learn about classes I have coming up. You'll also include links to articles, because I've written probably a couple hundred articles on those 3 topics in national magazines, Mother Earth News, Horticulture, Fine Gardening, Chickens Magazine, Community Chickens website, different places like that. So you can find about classes. You can find about, I'll have links to previous articles I've written on various topics. And I update people on what new book I have out and what are the reviews looking like. And so I want to shout out to Ellen Zakos, who has written some great gardening books and some great foraging books. She reviewed my tomato book and said it's the best book on growing tomatoes she's ever read. Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah.
So so go to Substack, get on my newsletter list, and I'll, it probably comes out like every other month. I might ramp it up to once a month just to be more reliable. But that's the best way to find out what I'm up to and what I'm doing. And otherwise, you can just Google my name. There's like a ton of hits just from Frank Hyman.
We'll include a link to the Substack in our show notes. And
great.
Of course, a link to your book as well. And Ellen Zakos is a mutual friend of ours. We're all members of GardenCom, the Association of Garden Communicators. So great to hear, because Ellen is a straight shooter. So Ellen's not going to gloss over anything. If she don't like it, she's going to tell you she don't like it.
I know.
So that is high praise indeed if Ellen liked it. So wonderful. Any last tomato growing advice for Mid-Atlantic gardeners, Frank?
The one thing I would say, 2 things I'll say real quickly. One, the point of a garden is to make the gardener happy. And so if you feel like you're working too hard or not getting good results, or you're getting good results, but you're working too hard, I step back and reassess. The point is your happiness, not somebody else's happiness. So look at it that way. The other thing that's important is plants are going to die. Do not be deterred is my advice. Sometimes I'll teach a class on gardening and somebody will say, "Oh, Frank, but what if the plant dies?" I just look at them all. It's 20, 30, 40, 50 people. And I say, look, y'all, I've killed more plants than all of y'all put together. Mm-hmm. But that's how I know this much. The good news when a plant dies is you don't have to put a tombstone out there to let everybody know. Yes, Frank killed a plant here in 1989. He killed one here in 2015. On and on. Plants are going to die. Do not beat up on yourself. And just take the lesson, like, oh, maybe that plant had too much sun or too much water, or, I planted too early or too late. Just take the lesson, and in the next year, you'll be a better gardener. And the following year, you'll be a better gardener than that. Your skills will improve, your knowledge will improve, your success will increase, and you'll be happy. Because that's the most important thing about a garden, is make the gardener happy, right? Does that make sense, Kathy?
Makes total sense, Frank. Thanks so much for sharing your tomato growing passion and all those great revolutionary tips.
Thank you for having me.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Hepatica, plant profile. Hepatica species, is a perennial wildflower that blooms in early spring with white, blue, lavender, or pink flowers. It's commonly known as liverleaf or liverwort, kidneywort, or pennywort. After flowering, the oval hairy fruits appear in small clusters in summer. The dark green glossy leaves are three-lobed, smooth, and leathery. The foliage is evergreen and turns a nice burgundy color in the fall. It's a member of the buttercup family and is sometimes considered part of the anemone genus. It's native to the northern hemisphere. 2 Hepatica species are native to eastern North America. They are the sharp-lobed Hepatica, Hepatica acutiloba, and round-lobed Hepatica, Hepatica americana. The sharp-lobed Hepatica prefers moist locations in sandy soils, while the round-lobed Hepatica likes more acidic soils in open woodlands. The round-lobed Hepatica is also referred to as Anemone americana or Hepatica nobilis variety obtusa. Hepaticas are less than a foot tall and are hardy to USDA zones 4 to 8. The flowers attract many pollinators, including butterflies, bees, flies, and beetles. The blooms close up at night and on cloudy days. In the summer, chipmunks and other small critters consume their fruits. Hepatica is widely considered to be deer-resistant and is generally ignored by rabbits. Hepatica, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my February gold, tete-a-tete, and Rip Van Winkle daffodils are finally blooming, and several other daffodil varieties are close at their heels. In the garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we talked about early spring garden cleanup tasks, including to make room in your compost pile for the new stuff from your spring cleanout by screening and finishing the compost and using up those old materials. In local gardening events this week that you might want to attend, the Tacoma Horticultural Club is hosting Best Pruning Practices with Eric Wenger. This is a talk covering basic types of pruning, maintaining plant structure, and examining some common pruning myths to see if they stand up to science and modern pruning techniques. This event is free and open to all. It takes place on Wednesday, March 18th at Historic Tacoma in downtown Tacoma Park, Maryland. You can find out more about this at tacomahort.org. And then there's a fig tree propagation workshop being hosted by DC Greens. This will be held at the Well at Oxen Run and is a hands-on workshop. The instructor will guide participants through the propagation process. Participants will learn how to properly take cuttings from a fig tree and support healthy growth for the upcoming season. That is taking place on Thursday, March 26th at 12 noon, and you can find out more about that at dcgreens.org. And then the 14th Annual Master Gardeners Association of the Central Rappahannock Area Symposium is taking place on April 11th from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in Falmouth, Virginia. Amongst the speakers will be myself, Kathy Jentz, speaking on ground covers. Our Washington Gardener magazine insect columnist Carol Allen will be speaking on soils, and friend of the podcast Heather Zindash will also be speaking at this event. You can find out more about it and register. The cost is $60 for master gardeners and $65 for the public. Go to mgacra.org/spring symposium. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with the last word from Green Prince with The Surprise Potato, a story by Fiona M. Jones. He opened his chubby fist and showed me what he had found, a tiny grubby potato no bigger than a cherry. I smiled and told him what it was, promising to cook it just for him. Normally, he turned up his nose at potatoes, but when dinner time arrived and that same boiled potato appeared on his plate, he ate it without hesitation. We hadn't even been growing potatoes. The little plant that sprouted that year must have been a survivor from 2 seasons past, left behind by the previous owners of the house. But while potatoes weren't part of our plans, our garden was filled with tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers, and soft fruits. My children grew so accustomed to eating homegrown food that one of them once got reprimanded at school for picking and eating blackberries from the edge of the school field. According to the teacher, that wasn't real food. Real food, they insisted, came from the supermarket, wrapped in plastic and already past its prime. We never saved much money growing our own fruit and vegetables. Our garden was small and our gardening skills smaller, but the rewards came in other ways: fresh air, family time, and the invaluable lesson that food doesn't just appear on store shelves. My children eagerly ate whatever they had helped grow, even when it was suspiciously healthy. The pride of bringing something from the soil to the kitchen was usually enough to overcome any fussiness at the dinner table. Years later, my eldest son joined a community gardening group at his church. One evening, he walked through the door with a grin, holding out his latest harvest, a big bucket of potatoes, all shapes and sizes, each one a little miracle of the earth. They were larger than cherries, fresher than anything from a store, and tastier than I ever imagined potatoes could be. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprince.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 4, All About Tomatoes, Episode 26, Heirloom Tomatoes, Episode 68, Summer Vegetables. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too.